You remember it, even if you pretend you don't. The subtle shift in the room whenever your sibling walked in, the way your mother's face softened, the way your father's voice changed, the warmth that moved toward them and away from you. You didn't have the words back then, but you felt it. You felt it like a shadow following you through every stage of your life. You were the child who learned to observe instead of speak. The child who learned to listen instead of ask. The child who learned to survive in the empty spaces left between your parents' affection. Children don't understand favoritism. They don't understand emotional hierarchy. They don't understand why one child is chosen and the other is not. They only understand the sensation of being less. And that sensation becomes their first identity. You didn't become quiet because you wanted to. You became quiet because you learned that your voice didn't change anything. You didn't learn independence because you were strong. You learned it because no one checked if you needed help. You didn't stop asking for affection because you grew out of it. You stopped because you learned you wouldn't receive it. And the strangest part, no one will ever admit it happened. Parents rarely do. They hide behind excuses. We loved you both equally. You're imagining it. You were always the strong one. But love is not what they said. Love is what you experienced. And your experience tells a different story. Carl Jung understood this wound deeply. He believed that every family creates an emotional script, a silent, unconscious pattern that each child is forced into, without consent, without awareness, without a chance to escape. One child becomes the chosen one, the extension of the parent's identity, the golden projection of everything they wanted to be, and the other becomes the shadow child, the one who carries what the parents deny in themselves, the traits they reject, the emotions they avoid, the wounds they never healed. Favoritism is never about the child. It is always about the parent. Your parents did not choose your sibling because they were better. They chose your sibling because your sibling matched their idea of themselves. They represented who your parents wanted to be: confident, compliant, talented, sociable, easy to understand. Meanwhile, you reflected the parts they suppressed: sensitivity, intensity, deep emotion, questions they couldn't answer, truths they didn't want to face. So they chose the familiar child, the comfortable child, the child who required less emotional maturity. And they overlooked the child who made them confront reality. This is why you felt distant from them, even when you lived in the same house. This is why you felt invisible while standing right in front of them. This is why you grew up questioning your worth, not because you lacked anything, but because they lacked the capacity to see you. They couldn't understand a child who felt deeply, thought differently, or questioned everything. So instead of expanding themselves to meet you, they shrank away. Every time your sibling was praised for something small, and you were ignored for something big, a message was carved into your nervous system. Your effort is never enough. Every time your sibling received comfort when they cried, and you were told to stop being dramatic, another message was carved. Your emotions are too much. Every time your sibling was defended and you were blamed, even when you were right, the message deepened. Your truth doesn't matter. And these messages didn't stay in childhood. They became the blueprint of your adulthood. This is why you struggle with self-worth, even though you know you're capable. This is why you apologize for things that aren't your fault. This is why you overthink every relationship. This is why you attract partners who make you feel like you have to earn their affection. This is why you give more than you receive. This is why silence makes you anxious. This is why attention makes you uncomfortable. This is why love feels unfamiliar. This is why emotional distance feels normal. You're not broken. You're conditioned. You weren't unloved. You were misunderstood. You weren't the weak child. You were the emotionally honest one. But children don't have the language to understand that. They only feel the ache of being the less chosen one. And that ache becomes a personality. The child who grows up trying to become enough, trying to be seen, trying to be chosen, trying to prove something no one ever asked for, trying to earn what should have been unconditional. You've been living with this wound for years, maybe decades, without fully realizing it. And the wound someone compliments you inside, you feel suspicious. In small, subtle ways. When someone loves you, you wait for them to leave. When someone is kind to you, you feel overwhelmed. When someone chooses you, you question it. When someone ignores you, it feels familiar. When someone mistreats you, it feels like home. Because the child who was not chosen learned that emotional crumbs were the standard. But here's the most important truth Jung would want you to understand. The child who was less loved often becomes the adult who feels more deeply, understands more fully, and transforms more profoundly. Because pain forces depth. Neglect forces observation. Silence forces reflection. Emotional hunger forces emotional maturity. Being the unchosen child forces you to build an identity separate from approval. Your sibling grew with validation. You grew with insight. One builds confidence, the other builds consciousness. You are not less because you were the unfavored child. You simply carry the depth your parents couldn't handle. And this is where the story shifts, because the child who wasn't chosen often becomes the adult who breaks the entire generational pattern, the one who sees the wound instead of repeating it, the one who heals instead of hides, the one who chooses themselves after years of being overlooked, the one who develops emotional intelligence far beyond what the family can understand, the one who stops chasing validation and starts giving themselves what they never received. You spent your childhood wanting your parents to choose you. Now adulthood is asking you to choose yourself, not out of resentment, out of recognition. Recognition of who you are, recognition of what you survived. Recognition of the emotional strength you built in silence. Recognition of the identity you formed without being guided. Recognition that you were never the problem. You were simply the child with more inner truth than they could manage. And once you see this clearly, the wound loses its power. Not because the past changes, but because your understanding does. There's a moment in adulthood when the truth hits you harder than it ever did in childhood. When you finally sit with your own patterns, long enough to realize that your parents choosing your sibling over you didn't just affect your childhood. It shaped your entire emotional architecture. You may not think about it daily, but it quietly controls your relationships, your reactions, your expectations, and even the way you treat yourself. Favoritism doesn't end in childhood. It evolves. It grows with you. It follows you into every room you walk into. You don't escape it by aging. You escape it by understanding it. And that understanding begins with recognizing the invisible inheritance you received. While your sibling inherited love, attention, and validation, you inherited something else entirely. Self-doubt, hyper-awareness, emotional over-responsibility, the impulse to fix things that were never your fault. You learned to anticipate disappointment before it arrived. You learned to study people to predict their moods. You learned to become small so others could remain comfortable. You learned to silence your pain because someone else always needed more than you. Your childhood taught you that your needs were negotiable. And so, even now, you negotiate your needs in every relationship you enter. Favoritism creates an internal script, and unless it's rewritten, you will keep performing it over and over with people who don't even resemble your parents. You'll choose partners who make you feel the same way your parents did. Less important, less prioritized, less chosen. Not because you want it, but because your nervous system is trained to recognize this emotional landscape as home. Love that feels equal will confuse you. Love that feels consistent will intimidate you. Love that gives without taking will overwhelm you. Love that stays will make you suspicious. You learned growing up that affection is conditional, not consistent. So as an adult, you brace for our withdrawal. You prepare for disappointment. You build emotional exit plans before anything even begins. This is why you overthink. This is why you question good things. This is why you struggle to trust. This is why abandonment terrifies you. This is why being ignored triggers you instantly. This is why being chosen feels unreal. This is why you feel compelled to earn everything. This is why you feel guilty when someone treats you kindly. You're not too sensitive. You're carrying the emotional residue of a childhood spent fighting for a place that should have been yours by default. But let's go deeper into Jung's perspective. Jung believed that in every family, each child unconsciously takes on a psychological role the parents themselves refuse to acknowledge. One child becomes the projection of their pride. The other becomes the projection of their shame. If one child reflects the parent's ego, the other reflects their shadow. Your sibling became the self your parents wished they were. You became the self they were afraid to confront. You might think your sibling was loved more because they were more obedient, more social, more good. But from a psychological standpoint, they were simply less threatening to your parents' unresolved wounds. You, on the other hand, represented the emotional lineage they were trying to escape. Maybe you were intense. Maybe you were curious. Maybe you were outspoken. Maybe you were imaginative. Maybe you were too quiet. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you saw truths they didn't want to admit. Parents who haven't healed choose comfort over connection. They choose the child who feels familiar over the child who makes them evolve. So you became the child overlooked not because you have lacked value, but because your value demanded more emotional maturity than they possessed. And this plays out in your self-worth. Your sibling learned, I am loved for who I am. You learned, I must shape myself into whatever others need. Your sibling learned, I matter naturally. You learned, I matter only when I'm useful. Your sibling learned, my needs will be met. You learned, my needs bother people. Your sibling learned, I belong. You learned, I have to earn my place. And when you grow up believing you must earn your place, every relationship becomes a test. You don't enter relationships to connect. You enter to prove your worth. You overextend yourself. You overgive. You overthink. You override your boundaries. You treat love like a performance. You treat attention like a privilege. You treat affection like something fragile that will break the moment you relax. And the worst part? You blame yourself for it. You tell yourself you're not good enough. You tell yourself you're hard to love. You tell yourself you're the problem. You tell yourself you're too much. You tell yourself you must be stronger. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel hurt anymore. But you are not the problem. You are the product of a home that taught you love has favorites. Here's what Jung would say. A child who was not chosen becomes an adult who chooses everyone but themselves. You choose their comfort over your honesty. You choose their needs over your boundaries. You choose their peace over your own. You choose their approval over your authenticity. You choose their love over your self-respect. Because deep down, the child inside you still believes, if I become who they want me to be, maybe this time I will be chosen. But adulthood reveals the truth your childhood couldn't process. You were never unworthy. Your parents were emotionally unequipped. And slowly, painfully, you begin to understand. Your sibling wasn't chosen because they were better. They were chosen because they were easier. Not emotionally deeper, just simpler. Not more lovable, just less confronting. Your depth required presence. Your truth required awareness. Your emotions required maturity. They didn't have those skills, so they chose the child who didn't challenge them. But you, the less chosen child, carry strengths your sibling never had to develop. You became perceptive. You became intuitive. You became emotionally intelligent. You became self-aware. You became resilient. You became independent. You became compassionate. You became wise far too early. You became someone who can understand pain in others effortlessly. Children who grow up unchosen often grow into adults who understand the human soul more clearly than anyone else. Your childhood wound carved depth into you. Your isolation sharpened your intuition. Your emotional hunger made you empathetic. Your silence turned you into an observer. You didn't grow despite being the unchosen child. You grew because of it. If this spoke to a part of you you've been carrying alone for years, like the video, share your story in the comments, and subscribe to Psychatic. Your voice matters here more than it ever did in your childhood.